Welcome back to Educator.com's English Grammar course. This lesson is on run-on sentences. Let's get started. Alright, we're going to begin with a brief overview. We're going to talk about sentence boundaries, which are what create run-on sentences when you don't have enough of them in the right places. We're going to do a brief review of phrases and clauses, which are the building blocks of run-on sentences, and how to fix them. And then we're going to look at the different kinds of run-on sentences and how to turn them into correct sentences. Alright, to begin with, boundaries. Sentences need boundaries, punctuation, and other techniques to break thoughts down into easily digestible chunks. Humans are easily distracted. They need their language, their thoughts in little bits, and so we use boundaries to break them down. Now, when there are too many boundaries, when it's broken down into pieces that are too small, then the sentences end up as fragments, which was covered in the previous lesson. When there aren't enough boundaries, sentences end up as run-ons. Okay, they just go on forever because there's nothing to stop them. That's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. All right. First, we need to establish the difference between a phrase and a clause because that contributes to how run-ons are made. A phrase does not contain both a subject and a predicate. It may contain one or the other, or neither, but never both. So, examples of phrases. To the store. It's a prepositional phrase. It doesn't really tell you a lot. You can't walk up to someone on the subway platform and say, to the store. Sleeping soundly, it's got a verb but no subject. Once upon a time, again, no subject, no predicate. And without saying a word, another prepositional phrase, doesn't have a subject, doesn't have a predicate. Now a clause, by contrast, contains both a subject and a predicate. It has something or someone performing an action and the action that something or someone performs. An independent clause expresses a complete thought and can stand alone. I went to the store. Subject I, predicate, went to the store. Complete thought can stand by itself. A dependent or subordinate clause cannot stand alone. It depends on another clause to do this, which is why we call it dependent. It depends. A dependent or subordinate clause begins with a subordinating conjunction or a relative pronoun. Now, we covered those in our lesson on conjunctions, so if you need a review, go back and look at that. Examples of dependent clauses are, while I was at the store, and who likes to go shopping. They add extra information, but they can't stand by themselves as independent clauses. All right, so what is a run-on sentence? Well, two or more improperly joined independent clauses need to be connected in certain ways so that the boundaries of the sentence and the relationship between its parts are clear. If you have independent clauses, you have to stick them together according to certain rules with conjunctions and all that good stuff. And if you do it wrong, you get a run-on sentence. A run-on sentence is one where this does not happen. Colloquially, we also call something a run-on sentence if it's too long to be spoken in a single breath. In fact, that is the #1 indicator that you have a run-on. You have to stop for air in the middle of your sentence. For example, I arrived at the train station, but my parents weren't there. They hadn't come to pick me up. I waited for hours, but they never came, and I waited, and I got cold and hungry. That is a long sentence. Way too long. It's got a whole bunch of independent clauses and dependent clauses all mushed together. They shouldn't be in one sentence. A fused sentence, which is a particular kind of run-on, is a run-on with two or more independent clauses run together. Japanese anime is Japanese animation. There are several important differences between anime and American animated comics and cartoons. Too long. Independent clauses. Japanese anime, subject, is Japanese animation. Okay, perfectly good predicate. You could make that a sentence all by itself. There are several important differences between anime and American animated comics and cartoons. That could be an independent clause all by itself. So what you really have is two complete sentences mushed together with no conjunction, no proper joining of any kind. Then you have a comma splice, which is a run-on with two or more independent clauses separated only by a comma. Comma splice, just think about the comma spliced into the middle, and somebody thinks that qualifies as a conjunction. It's not a conjunction. It just makes the sentence go on and on forever. One important difference is that anime tends to be more realistic and sophisticated than American versions, comma. Our animation often avoids real-life issues such as death or important aspects of daily life such as work. Now, if you tried to say that all in one breath, you would be wheezing. So, those are the major types of run-on sentences. What do you do about them? Well, first of all, we practice a little. See if you can find any fused sentences or comma splices in this passage. Perhaps the greatest comic book superhero of all time, Superman debuted in 1938. This Man of Steel was the creation of two young men, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Okay, there's your clue. That was too long. Siegel and Shuster were still in high school when they created their hero, whom they dubbed Champion of the Oppressed. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. That whole first sentence was one run-on, one comma-spliced sentence. See that comma right there? Perhaps the greatest comic book superhero of all time, Superman debuted in 1938. That could be an independent sentence. Superman debuted in 1938 is an independent clause. Perhaps the greatest comic book superhero of all time is a modifier that depends on the independent clause. So that could be a sentence all by itself, but instead we tack a comma on the end, no conjunction of any kind, and then we say, this Man of Steel was the creation of two young men, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Okay, you have two sentences mushed together with only a comma. It's a comma splice. All right, so once you've identified run-ons, what do you actually do about them? How do you fix them? Well, there are 5 ways to do it. First, separate clauses with a period. Japanese anime is Japanese animation. There are several important differences between anime and American cartoons. Here's how you fix it. Japanese anime is Japanese animation. Period. Hey, look, we have a completely grammatical sentence right there. There are several important differences between anime and American cartoons. Hey, look, it's another completely grammatical sentence. So, if you have 2 independent clauses stuck together, you can separate them with a period and make them their own sentences. All right. Second way, separate clauses with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Anime comes in dozens of genres for adults as well as kids. Here in America, cartoons are only for kids. Too long, fused sentence. What do you do? Well, anime comes in dozens of genres for adults as well as kids, comma, but note the conjunction. Here in America, cartoons are only for kids. We have 2 contrasting ideas. Anime comes in a whole bunch of genres for adults and children, and here in America, cartoons are just for kids. So we use a comma and the conjunction, but. Now, the third way to correct run-on sentences is to separate clauses with a semicolon. What's the difference between a semicolon and a colon? We'll get to colons in a minute. But use the semicolon only if the 2 sentences are closely related. Okay, so you've got 2 sentences that are closely related in thought, in concept, then you can stick them together with a semicolon. You may want to use a conjunctive adverb, such as however, after the semicolon as well. And if you have trouble with conjunctive adverbs, go back and check the lesson on conjunctions. All right, let's look at an example. Anime uses many of the same technological conventions as American animation. It is stylistically unique. How do we fix this? Anime uses many of the same technological conventions as American animation. Semicolon. However, comma, it is stylistically unique. What you do with a semicolon is you join 2 sentences that are related, but could each be independent. Sometimes you use a conjunctive adverb, sometimes you don't need to, but that's what a semicolon is for. Semicolons would actually solve a lot of run-on sentences, provided your ideas are actually closely connected enough. All right, the 4th way to correct a run-on sentence is to separate clauses with a colon or a dash. Now, if the second independent clause summarizes or explains the first, the second complete sentence builds on the first, sums it all up, or explains it, then you use a colon. If the clauses are connected and the second deserves emphasis, use a dash. A dash basically creates a dramatic pause before you say the next part of the sentence. There's one visible difference between anime and American animation: the character's eyes. Too long. There's one visible difference between anime and American animation, colon, the character's eyes. Notice in this case, the character's eyes is not an independent clause. You can actually use it to tack on an independent clause and it still works. You could also put in a dash right there, a nice long dash, if you wanted to make a big dramatic pause before you say the character's eyes. Big deal. All right. The 5th and final way to correct a run-on sentence is to turn one clause into a subordinate clause or modifier. You add a subordinating conjunction to one clause or make it a modifying phrase. So you basically stop it from being an independent clause. You make it subordinate, you make it a modifier, make it perform some other function in the sentence while still conveying your information. Here's an example of that already done for you. There are several differences between anime or Japanese animation, okay, modifying clause, and American comics and cartoons. For one thing, while anime comes in dozens of genres for kids and adults, comma, American cartoons are mostly for kids. Now remember, these sentences were all run together originally. Anime comes in dozens of genres for kids and adults, American cartoons are mostly for kids. In this case, we say, while. Use a subordinating conjunction. So all of a sudden it's a subordinate or dependent clause, and it's attached to the independent clause, American cartoons are mostly for kids. You've created a contrast, you've made your sentence clearer, and you no longer have to wheeze at the end of it. All right, let's do a little practice. Correct any run-on sentences that you find in this paragraph. One of the most popular means of transportation today is the skateboard. It was invented back in the 1900s, though no one knows exactly who made the first board or when. Well, there's a clue. The earliest skateboards were more like scooters. They were roller skate wheels attached to wooden boxes or boards. Okay, we've definitely got a couple of run-on sentences in here. Take a good look, pause the video if you need to, and figure out how to make this this paragraph correct. All right. This is a lot easier than it looked. One of the most popular means of transportation today is the skateboard. Period. Start a new sentence. Very simple. We've got two independent clauses. One of the most popular means of transportation today is the skateboard. And it was invented back in the early 1900s. Independent clauses, so break them up, make them independent sentences. And then we have the dependent clause, though no one knows exactly who made the first board or when. That's perfectly fine since it's attached to an earlier independent clause, so it can be part of a sentence. The earliest skateboards were more like scooters. We could use a semicolon here because the next independent clause is closely related to the first. They were roller skate wheels attached to wooden boxes or boards. You could also use a colon here because the second independent clause explains the first. They explain how the early skateboards were more like scooters. Either one would work. You could even use a dash and make a big dramatic thing out of it. The earliest skateboards were more like scooters. They were roller skate wheels attached to wooden boxes or boards. If you really feel like being dramatic, go ahead and use the dash. As you can see, run-on sentences are pretty easy to spot. Just listen for the wheeze. And they're pretty easy to correct. Just turn them into something that actually works in the sentence. Add conjunctions, break them into independent sentences, turn them into modifiers or subordinate clauses. Either way, run-ons are not too difficult once you've learned how to recognize them. And that's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. Educator.com.